Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 53rd Kilkenny Arts Festival. We are delighted to present the panel discussion on Tony and Jane O'Malley, the shared studio, this morning. Before we begin, in unlikely case of emergency, please note that the exit route is the same way you entered the venue. Please do not use the lift. Would you please take this opportunity to turn off your mobile phones, and please be advised there is no photography during the event. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoy this morning, and please welcome Anna O'Sullivan and our panelists.
Good morning, everyone. And as she says, I'm Anna O'Sullivan, the director of the gallery and also the curator of the exhibition Tony and Jane O'Malley, the shared studio. On behalf of our board and team and the Kilkenny Arts Festival, I'm happy to welcome you here this morning for this panel discussion. Before we begin, I need to get the thanks out of the way, but I'd like to thank and acknowledge our main funders, the Arts Council, for which we are so grateful. Thanks also to Kilkenny County Council for their important assistance throughout the year. And with regard to the particular support to this exhibition, I'd like to extend our grateful thanks to Brian Baum for his major support of this exhibition, which was made in memory of his late wife, Kilkenny-born Una Wilson. We really value his recognition of what we do at Butler Gallery. It means a lot. Thanks also for support from Kilkenny Arts Festival, Taylor Galleries and Mount Juliet Estate. The exhibition was organised at this time to acknowledge and celebrate the bequest of Tony and Jane's estate to Butler Gallery by Jane following her death in 2023. It is an extensive exhibition, so I do hope you will fully engage with all the elements, explore the virtual tour of Tony and Jane's shared studio, enjoy the art, watch the documentary, and refresh your appreciation of both Tony and Jane's work as committed artists, though I expect most of you here today may already be admirers of the work. I've mentioned before that the underlying theme to this exhibition is the story of a great love and partnership that was extraordinary for me to encounter through the many stories that Jane shared about Tony and their life together over the years. And realising this exhibition has been a labour of love for me, and one I hope is fitting acknowledgement by the gallery and the Kilkenny's great appreciation of Jane's gift to Butler Gallery. So let me introduce our panellists. Three of us knew Jane well, and two of us also knew Tony, and one of us is new to the O'Malley couple. I hope between us we can share some further insight into Tony and Jane's working and personal life together. Catherine Marshall at the end here is art historian, curator and editor, senior curator and founding head of collections at the Irish Museum of Modern Art from 1995 to 2007. Jonathan O'Grady, MPhil History of Art and Architecture at Trinity College. He will discuss Tony O'Malley's later works after Tony and Jane's return to Ireland and looks at landscape and their garden as subject matter. Sarah Stoten is a former director of the Stour Gallery, Warwickshire in the UK, and exhibited work by Jane and possibly Tony in the past. I'll begin by posing a few questions to each panellist and then open the conversation among ourselves, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for a Q&A with you all. We're hoping to extend to possibly an hour and a half, so just so you know. In the course of cataloguing and safeguarding Tony and Jane's work, which has been led by our collections registrar Anne Chumley and assisted by Niamh Toomey, we reached out to Trinity College's Department of History of Art to see if we could interest some graduates in helping out in the studio. We were lucky to find two, Johnny O'Grady and Anna Collins, both working on their dissertations and deciding when to address different aspects of O'Malley's work. Both are presenting a joint talk later in the run of the exhibition, so check out our website for information on our learning programme. Anna Collins' dissertation is entitled Returning to Irish Domesticity, the Works of Jane and Tony O'Malley in Callan, Kilkenny, and an Artistic Fondness for Rural Isolation, so I expect that will be quite interesting. Jonathan's dissertation has been developing, and I believe is entitled, though it may have changed since I last spoke to him, Landscape Contained, The Garden is Inspiration and Object in the Late Work of Tony O'Malley. So to begin with, Johnny, may I ask you to give us a bit of a flavour of this body of work and what we might expect in a more detailed talk later in the run of the exhibition?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So yeah, so basically, me and a fellow classmate have been conducting a period of research at the O'Malley Archive beginning last December, I think was the first visit we made, and then more regularly since January or February of this year. And we would go down every few weeks and spend a day basically in the archive. Essentially browsing, essentially discovering things, and gradually developing our ideas by sort of being present there in the house and seeing the material that's there. So my interest in when the opportunity to work with this archive was posed to us last October, I think it was, I'd already been interested in looking at landscape as subject. It's something that I'm interested in anyway, sort of long term, is depictions of, or landscape as subject matter, or how, in particular, contemporary Irish artists deal with landscape as subject matter, how its politics has changed throughout generations, etc. So that was already my frame of mind going into this, and then discovering the archive and Tony's work, it felt like a unique opportunity to deal with that sort of thematic in the context of his work. And landscape for Tony was kind of his primary interest in many respects. The vast majority of his works, you could even say, were landscape to some degree, to varying degrees. So being present in the house and in the archive, which they began to sort of build and cultivate when they returned to Ireland in 1990, after their period in St. Ives. I decided that was a good opportunity to focus on that period and that period of working and that body of work from the 90s until 2003 when Tony passed away. So looking at how Tony dealt with landscape upon his return to Ireland, his upbringing in Kilkenny and Killarn was always sort of present in his mind and important to him even when he was abroad. And his return presented this sort of circular moment, and sort of completed a sort of story for him in many respects. And the works that he created upon the return here to Kilkenny are sort of an interesting culmination of his concerns throughout a long career.
Did the garden have much, did you discover much about how they worked in the garden or reflected upon it?
Yeah, the garden. I mean, the garden was mostly Jane's project for the most part. Like, she was the one who attended to it, but they both herself and Tony found a lot of inspiration in it. So in prior periods, Tony might have found inspiration in landscape, sort of as it surrounded him in St. Ives, the moors in St. Ives, or the tropical islands in the Bahamas, or what have you. But once they returned, it seems, I mean, they began to cultivate this beautiful garden, and his practice became a lot more situated. So there was still this interest in natural forms and landscape, but it was this contained landscape. It was a cultivated landscape. And the garden was being cultivated while also being used as a source of inspiration, as subject matter as well.
Had you been looking at other artists, and if you had, then how did Tony and Jane distinguish themselves in their respect to landscape?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, Tony is, especially his abstractions, are usually compared to, sort of, I suppose, contemporaries of his, like Patrick Collins or Camille Souter. The way that he creates a sort of aerial perspective landscapes that are seen from above. I think the way that Tony maybe diverges from that is his move between figuration and abstraction. So his adoption of abstraction as a primary idiom once he moved to St. Ives in 1960 or soon after didn't replace his earliest work, which was almost entirely representational. He didn't understand abstraction at that time, or he hadn't discovered it in a way that was useful for him. But his meeting or his befriending sort of important modernists in St. Ives in the 60s instigated him adopting abstraction as a primary language through which to work, but it didn't, as I said, entirely replace it. So there's always this kind of push and pull between a sort of abstract composition and elements that are very clearly representational or allude to something that is familiar.
There's much been said about his approach to abstraction, and I think it might have been an interview with Brian Fallon, and referring to his earlier work, Tony declared that painting for me was an implosion onto a limited area, not an explosion. Just before he died, however, he described the large canvas on which he was working at the time as an explosion of an implosion. It was titled The Riddle of the Universe 2, which was last worked on Christmas Day 2002, with his last marks being in ultramarine blue, and we have it on view in the exhibition, leaning as opposed to hanging because it wasn't finished, but it does also include the #1 version of that painting. Really worth seeing. Let me turn to Catherine now. And Catherine, you wrote an essay in the book for Tony O'Malley's retrospective at IMA in 2005 entitled "A Time When Irish Artists Lived Without Praise." Could you share with us some of the central points of that essay or anything you'd like to remember of that time?
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Anna. And thank you for asking me to be part of this panel. Good to meet.
Catherine, by the way, is doing another talk, a whole talk in our program. So do check out that learning program. So we look forward to that at a later time of the run. Sorry, Catherine.
Thank you. What did I mean by that? The quotation, the title of that essay that I wrote then back in whenever it was, 2005, A Time When Irish Artists Lived Without Praise, comes directly from words that Tony himself spoke. He described the 60s, the 50s, and the 60s as a time when Irish artists lived without praise. And he went on a little bit wistfully, maybe even a little bit resentfully, to say that, you know, nobody would call themselves an artist in those days unless they were foreign or had a foreign sounding name. Now, if you think hard about this, there was one great rival figure in Irish art in those days who did have a foreign sounding name and who was born, if you like, into a world that was made for him to succeed in and who knew exactly how to exploit it. So I suppose the world, a time when Irish artists lived without praise, is about a time when, for most people in Ireland, especially people who didn't go through art college as well, or have the kind of family backing that, let's name the famous artist with the foreign-sounding name, Louis Le Brocq had. There was really it was very, very, very difficult, nearly impossible to make any kind of mark on the world. And the thing, we talk about Tony as a painter all the time. There's another side to Tony, which is he was a musician. And I think when we're talking about the abstract work, Jonathan may well come back to this. You know, in a way, the abstract works look abstract, but they don't sound abstract. If you sort of listen, you can hear the buzz of the bees, or you can hear twittering birds, and you can see a bit like Paul Klee could do. Anyway, I won't dwell on that because it's not my part of this conversation. But to go back to the time without praise, Tony was working in the bank. I mean, yeah, by the time he started to be even moderately known, when I say moderately known to about 50 people in the country, around County Wexford, when he was working in the bank in Enniscorthy and New Ross. He was painting, he was stored at night in his digs, showing the odd painting in little amateur art exhibitions, sending stuff into the RHA, not getting very far with it, and generally speaking, being rejected, you know, and expecting to be rejected because he didn't have that confidence that those other people, the ones who did have praise, the few, got. But he was also very interested in writing. He was a great reader all his life. And so he liked the work of poets and writers like Pádraig Fallon, and then Pádraig Fallon's, I think, son, Brian Fallon, who became the leading, became the actually literary editor of the Irish Times, as well as the person who wrote most about the visual art for the Irish Times in those days. And Brian Fallon, Tony, was a regular family visitor in the Fallon family household in Wexford. Brian got to know him well. They had a personal friendship. And Brian Fallon did occasionally review Brian's work when there was an outlet for it. But, you know, reviewers can be passionate about somebody, but unless they have the space and an editor willing to take it, it's quite difficult even for them to publish it. So I suppose Brian Fallon did whatever he could do, and he also did it for a great many other artists. And he loved painting, and he loved the St. Ives School. So he would have followed Tony's interest in going to St. Ives. Also, his brother Conor Fallon was an artist who lived in St. Ives and was married to a St. Ives painter, Nancy Wynne Jones. And so the St. Ives connection was big. But that's as far as it went, really. Tony wasn't getting very far with it. So living without praise, living without acknowledgement, living without affirmation. And if you add all of those things together, it's very hard to do anything. And also, in increasingly bad health, which eventually led him, of course, to move to St. Ives. And that's familiar territory for everybody. I won't go back into that. But then he, in St. Ives, met the St. Ives group that Johnny referred to. And among them, he also met Effie McWilliam. And Effie McWilliam was from Belfast. He took a great interest in Tony. By this stage, about 1970 or so, Tony had met Jane as well, and that relationship was beginning. But Effie McWilliam was very aware of the struggle that this artist was going through, no matter how good his friends in St. Ives were. And his work was bought and shown in St. Ives, not back in Ireland, but there. But Effie McWilliam persuaded Tom Caldwell of the Caldwell Gallery in Belfast to take Tony on. And I have to tell this story. Well, can I shoot on for a minute? He also met his friend from Belfast, George McClelland, in Dublin, or in London, took him out to lunch and said, there's an artist. His words were, there's a bloody great artist from Ireland in Cornwall, and he's starving, right? They didn't have enough food to put on the table. And Tony was married to Jane at that point. So George, who had run a gallery in Belfast and been bombed out of it during the Troubles, went down to Cornwall and met Tony and then put a plan together that really created Tony O'Malley. So from being without praise, he was catapulted into fairly serious praise by a professional. But maybe, you know, I've talked long enough. I think the without praise bit is enormous. And by the way, think back as well, the Arts Council in Ireland only began in 1950. They didn't know how to be an arts council. Just as most of us starting anything don't know how to be what it is until we try it out. And so their model in the Arts Council in Ireland, apart from literature, because literature always knew where it was going in this country, but for the visual arts, was to copy what was happening in other places. And that didn't mean looking at the work of relatively unknown artists, but worse again, unknown artists who hadn't even gone to art college, who were self-taught and who were inventing everything to do with what they did, even the materials they used as they went. And so they had no time for Tony O'Malley. None. Absolutely none. Until the 70s. And then I would say, seriously, maybe helped by Brian Fallon, but seriously pushed by the McClelland plan.
Just to finish that point, because we'll move on to Sarah in a second. George was a businessman, and whilst he saw an opportunity in supporting Tony's work, it did make an enormous difference in Tony's life by buying work. Did he eventually gift that work to Emma? I mean, it did turn things around for them. I know that's a whole other story, but George's philanthropic relationship with Tony ended up being a really good one. I mean, they're rare when they happen, but when they do, they're incredible.
It was good and bad.
Okay.
It was very acrimonious, but George adored Tony. So it was acrimonious on Tony's side because George had very strong personality, very strong Ulster Presbyterian Scot, very strong sense of duty and drive, but he'd controlled everything around him, and he wanted to control Tony. And of all the artists I've ever come across, I would say the least possible to manage in any way was Tony O'Malley. And of course, he hadn't even had the rigour of art college, so he had no discipline in that way. His only focus was to make the art that he wanted to make. So, will I give you a quick burst of what George did?
Sure.
George went to see Tony and Jane and immediately was taken with the work. He fell totally in love with it, actually. And he went back to London. He was a businessman, as Anna said, but his business was art. He ran art galleries and acted as agents for different people that he was drawn to. So he had a look at Tony's work and drew up a 10-point plan in 1978. And he went back to Tony with the 10-point plan, and it set out things that should happen within a period of 10 years. And he said, 10 years from now, you will be famous. Well, George is very proud of the fact that although he and Tony fell out, and the plan, Tony curtailed it in lots of ways, almost everything that they had in the 10-point plan was achieved by 1982. So they included things like increase the baseline for the price of Tony's paintings. The Tom Caldwell Gallery were selling Tony's paintings when they bothered to sell them because they didn't do promotion, they just had work in the store. And if it's not being asked for, it's not going to be sold. The baseline was £200 a painting in 1978. George said, we have to get all of that back and we have to raise the baseline. So Christmas 1978, he helped to organise an Amnesty International, I think it was Amnesty, but a big charity auction in London. And he put in a work by Tony, and he put it in at £2,000, which was very ambitious, actually, because nobody knew him. But he persuaded somebody he knew in Allied Irish Banks, which were building up their London business in 1978, persuaded that man to buy it. And suddenly, Tony O'Malley's work, the going price, is £2,000. So, that was the kind of thing I mean, business head. He also then said, we will get a touring exhibition of your work funded by the Arts Council of Ireland and with the catalogue going within, 5 or 10 years. He said they got it in 4 years. And the rest is history, really. There were other things. It's a very interesting plan.
Wonderful. And the best gallerists do have those plans for their artists. And it's wonderful that a lot of that was achieved. Let me turn to Sarah Stoten now. And you and your husband, Brian, knew Tony and Jane so well. And I'm sure we'll unpack some of that again in a minute. But you, in your capacity as director of the Stour Gallery in Warwickshire, showed Jane's work over the years in different exhibitions. What was it like to work with Jane and Tony, and what are your greatest memories of your working and personal friendship with them both? I know that's a big question, but you're brilliant talking about both of them. So I don't know where you're going to start on that, but about working with Jane, I suppose, first, which is probably the most.
Well,
Closer, if you don't mind. Bring it just close to you.
oh, okay. I'm not sure I need a mic, but I'll try. Jane and Tony were really the reason that we came to Ireland. And in all those years ago, it was still done by a polite letter of introduction, because although we knew St. Ives very well and knew all the artists who were painting and living down there, to our and the O'Malley's astonishment, we had never met each other. Now, we didn't live in St. Ives, but it felt often to me as though we did. However, I did get a letter of introduction from an archivist in St. Ives called Janet Axton, who was also married to a painter. And they'd been very great friends of the O'Malleys in St. Ives. And we came over. I didn't know anything about Kilkenny, except that it had a great reputation for crafts and craft work. So this wonderful introduction to Ireland, to meet Jane and Tony. And on that first meeting, well, you'll know, Johnny, about how their garden has got the studios at the end of it, and then a storeroom that's like an aeroplane hangar that have got all the work wonderfully catalogued in a somewhat idiosyncratic way by Jane, but everything was catalogued. Jane and I went down to look at her work in the gallery while Brian sat with Tony in the garden with a bottle of Jameson's between them. And he told me that it felt the equivalent of sitting with Picasso, and that Tony had asked him an incredible question and said, "Did you know that Adolf Hitler went to school with the philosopher Wittgenstein?" And Brian said, "I can't believe it. I can't believe it." And they had that kind of level of Tony's intellectual conversation for about 2 hours while Jane and I looked at her work together. Now, it was decided by all of us that we would show Tony's work as well as Jane's, although it was easier to take some of Jane's smaller pieces with us. Tony's work was not framed at the time, but I took back quite a lot of works on paper and had them framed up. And in those days, all galleries subscribed to a small magazine. I think you've got an equivalent here, A5 size, and it's called Galleries, and told you what was happening in the country. And I put that I had works on paper by Tony O'Malley and small paintings by Jane O'Malley, and didn't really hope for much, partly because it was, I think, on that first visit that we bought a copy of the Irish Times, and in its magazine part, the headline was "Irish Art for Irish Walls." And we thought, good God, we got if we're ever going to take any of our artists over to Ireland, we're going to have a few problems if that's the attitude. But the phone didn't stop going, and it tended to be people from the north, but certainly the name of Tony O'Malley was known by then, and that is 30 years ago. And I did have people who flew over just to see Tony's pieces of work on paper. And they tended to be abstract pieces of fieldscapes and landscapes in Cornwall. one of the things that you'll have to forgive me for is thinking back over all those years of friendship and exhibitions. The dates get terribly muddled, and I find it really difficult to believe that the big exhibition at Tate, no, not Tate St Ives, at Tate in London, they had their one and only exhibition of Cornish painters, and Tony was part of that group. And in terms of an international reputation, that helped Tony O'Malley tremendously. He was there alongside Ben Nicholson. He was there alongside Barbara Hepworth. He was there alongside, the man whose family made the silk. Yes, yes. They were all there, and Tony was selected to be part of that. And that meant a little bit like the first painting to be priced at £2,000, to be part of that very select band of adored, really, painters in Britain was a great thing for him. We went friendly with them until the days when they were prosperous, and more than prosperous, you might say. There's no doubt that the tiger, the Irish tiger, was very, very good for them. And I was told a story by one of the Taylor brothers who were showing his work, that during that time, people were waiting and the work had not arrived. And Pat Taylor was saying, it's coming, they're letting me know, the van's nearly here. And when it arrived, bubble wrapped, people were buying through the bubble wrap. Now, I don't know whether that is something to be inordinately proud of, but nevertheless, I don't think it's happened to many artists. So there were two wonderfully comfortable people. But a little bit later on in this conversation, I hope I get the chance to tell you what Jane's stories were about what it was like when they actually arrived.
Look, fire away, do tell us.
Fire away, she says, fire away. Well, this is Jane's story as told to me. And as we all know, in every storytelling, you get a different story. That's why they're stories. So this is my remembrance of Jane's story to me. They came over on a boat that caught fire. The ferry caught fire, and they had to get out of the cabins underneath the smoke, which is why Jane always flew to Bristol and took the train down to St Ives after that. No more ferry boats for either of them. And she was helping Tony, who was quite lame at that time. The piece of land and the little, very little house, the sort of house children draw, with a door and a window either side, was what Jane had bought with a smallish inheritance, an acre field and a labourer's cottage. And they had very little else. They slept, she put wads of newspaper on the floor and they slept on foam, and they lived on eggs and cabbage. Jane had a bicycle, she told me. Tony was quite lame, and that was before the time, but leading up to the time that Catherine has talked about. So they came with really nothing, because Tony had not been able to crack, except with some galleries, he'd not been able to make the impact he should have made to be able to make a living from his work in England. One of the paintings that we bought of Tony O'Malley's is of a place called Port Leven. It's an abstract painting, quite big. Well, I'll tell you how big it was in a minute. It was, Port Leven has two harbours, and they're both pretty obvious in the painting. But when we took it apart to see the condition of it, it had been painted on the front page and back page of a copy of the Irish Times. And it was the one that talks about the assassination of JF Kennedy. And it had been whitewashed by Tony and used as a canvas. I think his sister sent him the Irish Times every week. So we've still got that painting, and it's lovely. But we did bring it when we had a show in Ireland, and it didn't sell at the time because it was not then of Ireland. So it did take its time for them to get seriously well known. Jane had gone from Canada to Switzerland by herself as an au pair. And she was there for 5 years, she told me, looking after delightful children, but not delightful enough for her to ever want her own. And the family invited them to Switzerland for their honeymoon after their wedding in St. Ives. And their wedding was incredibly simple. And Jane's bouquet was made from pink thrift that Tony picked on the hillside overlooking the sea. And when she died, her little bunch of pink thrift was buried with her. She had kept it all those years for that purpose. It was a great, great love affair. She arrived in St. Ives because she found that there was a school of painting there. And she did not want to go to the big schools in London. Now, there is a school of painting still in St. Ives and still run in the same place. It was very small then, and it was a fairly, I was going to say, incestuous group of people. Well, I don't think incest played any sort of role in it. But everyone knew everyone else very, very well. And suddenly, this incredible presence of Jane O'Malley entered St. Ives. And if I can be a bit unwoke for a moment, the men were just gobsmacked. And the women were furious. And I remember having time with he was a German painter, got his name, Kurt, it will come back to me in a moment, but he was talking about Tony, and he said, we were all after her, and that Irish git got her. Anyway, so he did. And Jane said to me, and you know why? He came over to me and he said, I'll cook you the full Irish. And he did. And their relationship in Cornwall, Tony by then, he'd moved from Nancy Wynne Jones's house, which sounds a fairly decadent setup, actually, over the years of artists. And I think it was Tony who introduced Nancy Wynne Jones to Conor Fallon, but my timing might be wrong over that. But they were as poor as you could be, but they did have a rent-free cottage, Seal Cottage, which overlooks Porthmeor Beach, which Tony had got courtesy of the Arts Council of England, and sort of sneaked Jane into it. Anyway, that's where they lived, and that's where they painted. And they set up a table in the mornings, the same table they'd had their breakfast from, and Jane was one side and worked, and Tony was the other. So I looked at the big easels, and I've looked at those, and I thought, where was that? Where were they painting? But I suspect it's one of the Porthmeor studios. Anyway, that shared poverty is a bit strong to call it. But Jane said, I did baked potatoes every night of my life. And she still kept her North American accent. And her garden that Johnny referred to was in that smallish space, an incredible achievement with its arches of laburnum and allium, and just wonderful, and its ponds. And when I asked her about it and said, how did you even conceive of it? She said, I'm North American. And it was true, that big, can-do North American attitude pushed them both forward, even though I would say Jane was quite an introverted person socially. I'll finish there.
That's lovely, Sarah. Thanks for sharing that. That point about the Portmore Studios and the fact that they received some assistance from the Arts Council really followed through into their lives, because they were so generous in their time when times were good, and they had made some money in the 80s and 90s. They bought the family home in Bridge Street in Callan, Tony's home, and Jane turned it into an artist in residence, which was left to the Royal Hibernia Academy in Dublin, and artists now get a chance to live there and work there, and there was no expense spared in renovating that home. It also included Tony's mother's, some of the artifacts left from the shop that she ran, stamps and small goods and whatever, but it's a wonderful place for artists to and follow on. It's always giving back, paying forward and realizing what an impact that space could have on artists. And then in addition to, there was always the issue, because they didn't have children, where and who would look after the artwork. So, and the fact that we had done some exhibitions and books and about the work over the last number of years really reassured Jane that she was in good hands. But what I love about Tony and Jane's story is how mutually sympathetic they were of each other. We know that Jane was amazing at caring for Tony, whose health was problematic, but Jane kept him healthy to the extent that they shared 30 wonderful years together. And then Tony, in turn, was highly supportive of Jane's work as an artist and greatly encouraged her to keep working and painting. They were both such grafters, you know, and really prolific, working at all time and day in the evenings. They didn't have social media or the internet sucking up swaths of their time. Instead, their focus was on the enjoyment of work. And one of my favorite works of Jane's is one we purchased from the black and white show for the permanent collection, of her standing very comfortable in her body, of course, as she should have been, standing naked in front of a mirror, drawing possibly Tony sitting in the bed behind her, who was also drawing. And it's just a really sweet, wonderful work, and it's on show in the exhibition. And in the shared studio, it was important for me to create a balance. I tried to cover the most important aspects of each of their work, but as I've said to the team at Butler Gallery, this is only the beginning. Representing the estate allows us the luxury of being able to dip into the work thematically and study the work and discover and present other responses to the work in greater detail. But I'd like to give Jane a bit of an opportunity here. I mean, Catherine, would you have anything to say about the quality of Jane's work? I know that while Sarah showed work in St. I in Warwickshire, I wondered how, well, it's sort of different how she sat in the St. Ives art community and then the Irish community, but it's very accessible. And to be honest, so many people come up to me and say they love Jane's work. They sometimes even prefer it to Tony's, which is a very different ball of wax. But I mean, really, that encouragement she received from Tony really helped her blossom in her time, I think. And you know, they sold well both through the Taylor galleries over the years. But would you have anything to say much about her work as such?
Yeah, I think that Jane's biggest creation was Tony, actually. I think that's fair to say, because they met when she was in her late 20s. He was about 60. I think, I forget that, I didn't do my sums and look at years and dates or anything, but I mean, Jane told me at that party where I think Nancy Wynne Jones had a party and they were both at it, and it was a crowded party, but she actually said it was like, you know, that moment where you see somebody across a crowded room. She knew the minute she saw him. And actually, Tony was a bit like that. He had a twinkle in his eye, you know. I mean, I didn't know him until he was in his late 70s probably, or I don't know, I didn't ask at the time, but quite elderly. But already, you just would feel so enlivened by that twinkle and the touch of humour and everything. And so the two of them fused, I think, all through the work they did. Tony did encourage Jane. I don't know in the beginning whether he encouraged her because he liked her art so much as because he just loved her and couldn't get over the fact that she was sharing his life, you know, because she was really such a special person, and she was prepared to take him on. He was blind in one eye, he lost a lung, he'd already lost the lung before they met, he'd had a heart attack before they met. So, you know, his health wasn't good, but somehow, and by the way, she had a bicycle when they came to Ireland, but he rode a bike with her because there are photographs of them around the lanes, around Callan and stuff. So he was healthy living with her until he was past.
The Bahamas, I think the fact that they had those times in the sunny shores of the Bahamas or Scilly Isles or eventually Lanzarote, really, because Jane's sister had a home in the Bahamas and they, Paradise Island, and they spent summers there. And they were, as I said, had no money, but Jane's father sent them airline tickets every year so that they could spend, and those months in the sun really helped Tony's health along. And I mean, the shared studio also, you see wonderful photographs of them working outdoors together, which was wonderful. But sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, you're fine. And that's very important. And the colour of the Bahamas really comes into the work. But I think that while Tony encouraged Jane all the time, I think it really wasn't until he became quite infirm that Jane's own opportunity to be an artist took off. And then I think he put his weight behind that totally. But her style is very different to his. I often think that Tony was the brush man and Jane is the line person. But she had a great sense of colour.
That's very true in relation to her black and white works. And so I did a show with her of her black and white works and looking at her notebooks. And she was always like surprised, like, I can't understand why you see so much in this. What I saw in it was that from the very beginning, before she met Tony, and then through their honeymoon or whatever, there was an extremely strong line and a confidence in line that really showed in those drawings. And so we did a show, and so many of them sold. We did a lovely catalogue. It's available at the gallery, and we have a loop of many of the drawings that were sold. But it just really shows you the strength of her line that was totally her own. And I think what Tony probably encouraged more was the use of colour and painting. But she didn't have enough confidence in herself, and I think that also was built upon over the years by their relationship and working together.
If I could just add something there, Anna, and also something that Sarah said, I think Jane was very introverted, very shy person, and Tony made life work for her because he was really gregarious. And he played the accordion, you know, he sat in the corner and did the Irish thing, you know. But as far as the artwork was concerned and Jane's line, I think now, especially seeing an exhibition with both of their work together, I think sometimes, you know, those big lines that come into Tony's work with the knife, where he scratches from bottom left-hand corner and shoots up here in a big curving line. I think Jane influenced that. I think Tony was influenced by her. I'm sure she was influenced by him. She couldn't escape it. But, you know, it was reciprocal, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway.
Jonathan, do you have anything else to say about the work before we kind of open it up a bit to the audience here?
Yeah.
Or after we've just been chatting about different
No,
things?
not at all. No, I mean, it's amazing to hear the kind of stories from the fellow panelists. And I mean, I haven't, as I mentioned, I've been doing this project or this research alongside a classmate, and her particular focus is on Jane. And specifically,
She couldn't make it, unfortunately, because she's in the UK. But the
Yeah.
talk that they'll do together will be fascinating.
Exactly, yeah. We'll do a talk, I think September, isn't it, 24th? We'll do a joint talk discussing our interests more in depth. But Annie rather, will focus on Jane's interaction with the house, how she kind of carved into the walls, and the house through Jane became sort of a living artwork as well. So the integration between the two artists is really like quite fabulous. I'm not quite sure what else.
No, they had a lovely life together. I mean, the parties they had were fantastic, with poets and writers and great neighbours they had. Jane was so lucky to have the best of neighbours around her. One of them is here. Anna is here. Lots of Annas going on here, but Anna and Phil were fantastic friends and supporters of Jane when Tony passed away. But and croquet on the lawn, you know, imagine that. But we actually bought a set of croquet to have to maybe do something on the lawn at the back of the gallery at some point, maybe for our members' party. But no, I think the happiness and the joy that they had together was just relevant, you know, that the house really revealed that, and they extended on to that neighbour's cottage. Such a beautiful place to visit, and the garden and the studio down the little lovely walk from the house to the studio is just beautiful in its approach to their working day, which they, of course, you know, as I said, they worked day and night, but also just wanted to see, because Lorna Donlan's here in the audience, and Lorna was Jane's long-term assistant and knew Jane extremely well and worked with her and was very kind to us and helped us in the movement of the half-finished loom of a tapestry that Jane was working on with advice, and that's a really special part of the exhibition as well, is showing that unfinished piece. But we really love that you're here today, Lorna, to see this and see the show. She's was such an incredible support to Jane over the years and has been really helpful to us too. So appreciate that you being here. I think we could probably now open it up to see if anyone has any questions for any of the panelists. Yeah, great, thank you. Anyone got some comment or question for anyone? Yeah, there you go, Trish. Thanks very much.
That's been amazing. Thank you so much. Can I just ask, you aroused a question in me about Tony and Jane's house in Callan. And the garden sounds like it was absolutely incredible. Can I ask you what has happened to their house, please, if anybody knows? Thank you.
Well, the garden, well, we were very lucky in that, I mean, it is unusual. It does open up a big issue that Jane and Tony left the estate to Butler Gallery that came along with the house and garden and a sum of money, which we have for the most part invested in the Community Foundation Ireland, because it's a double-edged sword. It's a huge responsibility to caretake work for the long term, you know, and when you started working out the pounds, shillings and pence and how much this is going to cost, it's actually quite, you know, for us to be really responsible, we have to have things in place. So for the long term, financially. So unfortunately, we're going to have to sell the house and garden. We can't hold on to it unless some brilliant philanthropist came along with millions of euro that could allow us to buy it and keep it. It is in rural Ireland. Security is an issue, and we do want to preserve the work for the future. It's our responsibility to safeguard that work, and that's really important. But in the meantime, we've been there for a number of years. We'll be there for a number of years further because of the detailed work that's being carried out on the cataloguing on the work and the storing of it so that it can be moved safely. And yeah, it does bring up an issue generally in Ireland. There's a lot of older artists that have come to a certain point that don't have funds or don't have property that they can donate to someone to help safeguard. But Jane's was only her focus was on preserving Tony's legacy. We had to encourage her to also include herself in that mix, and we have that wing dedicated to their work. So we're going through the work in creating a core group that will always be kept within the estate to show. At some point in time, the Taylor Galleries may have some paintings to sell, and we have some prints for sale. But we're not a commercial dealer. We're not a gallerist. We're representing the estate, and we have that opportunity to do a kind of scholarly approach to the work in time. But yeah, that is the outcome. Not to be completely transparent and open, that is what's happening at the moment. The garden is, you know, Jane spent a fortune on gardeners coming and keeping the garden in place. We haven't been able to do the same. We're keeping it, you know, respectable, but it's hard to keep it up because there was always somebody. It was like Grand Central Station. Lorna will tell you, you know, in that conservatory, people coming and going and gardeners and this and that. I mean, it was fabulous. It was quite a social place, while it was quite solitary though for Jane. And it might have been possibly, I mean, we did inquire whether the state or county council or someone would be interested in buying it to turn it into a visitor service, but there wasn't an appetite there. Capital is really difficult to get people encouraged to do that. So, but that's why I think the virtual tour is really important, and I hope people will, you know, explore that, because that really retains that experience of going through the garden and going into the studio and experiencing the nooks and crannies of the space and seeing how they both worked. And our registrar, Anne, is really being very meticulous about the recording of all that. We've had wonderful photographs of by Ross Kavanagh of capturing great shots of the place. So that's the quick answer. Not quick, but, you know, an answer to that. Anyone else? Oh, there we go. There's Anne herself.
Hi, sorry, I'm Anne Chomley. I'm working on the O'Malley collection with my colleague Neve, who I believe is here somewhere. I just wanted to add a bit more detail to that. Neve and I gave a talk at the Irish Museums Association a couple of years ago in Kilkenny about, in Kerry, about the studio. What's happening at the moment is a transition of an artist studio into a museum collection, effectively. So Anna alluded to this, but what Neve and I are doing, we've done a big risk assessment of what's going on in the studio. Jane and Tony had a beautiful light space. Light is very bad for artworks. They had lots of creatures that were living in the studio alongside them, also bad for artworks. Their storage was amazing for artists to put in place all those facilities. But once again, they're not sort of museum standards. So Neve and I are working through the collection, doing an inventory, and then matching that up to the number of works which Jane did catalogue under her own system with Lorna as well, which was absolutely incredible for her to have done that. But what we're doing at the moment is a big risk management and an improvement of the conditions to help the long-term preservation of the collection. So that's a very museum-y answer to what's going on at the house. We've been working on that for the last couple of years, and for the last few months, we've been working on the preparation of works for the exhibition, including how to actually move Jane and Tony's work tables safely, to catalogue them and document them pretty much in the same way that the Hugh Lane Gallery have done with the Francis Bacon studio, just with a slightly lighter touch. How we can really look to document and preserve everything for the future. So that's really what's going on behind the scenes at the moment.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Anne. Anyone else? Oh, here we go at the front here. Thanks.
Hello. Hello. Sorry. Referring to yourself, your own contribution, Catherine, I think I read somewhere that about the isolation or the lack of recognition for people in other times in Ireland. I think I read that Tony O'Malley, the bank, Munster and Leinster Bank, had a half-day Wednesday and a half-day Saturday, and he used to go out painting, and he recounted he had a Morris Minor.
That's right.
And he used to be outside in the country painting.
Yeah.
And there weren't too many cars around either. But when he could hear one coming, he grabbed everything and threw it straight into the car to the back and jumped into the car so as not to be seen.
That's absolutely right. And he did a lot of work on, it's very small scale work, because he could do it in the car when it was, weather conditions weren't good outside or something. So the car should be part of the studio in a way, you know, but it doesn't exist any longer. Yeah. He did, yes, he did. He did. He got around. He was able to manage. But the recognition thing was big. And they all suffered from it. The ones who went to art college had a network, so they supported each other, but Tony wasn't part of that network. So for him, and, you know, Sarah talked about the St. Ives studio, which he got from the Arts Council of Great Britain, and he got it through the St. Ives painters, who were hugely supportive of him. That was a big, if you like, a great lever in helping later on to get the Arts Council to put on the touring exhibition that they gave him here. So those things did add up. And actually they didn't buy the house in Ireland until after the touring exhibition here. So that they had already begun to get a little bit of recognition here by the time they got the cottage. But anyway, there you go. But thank you for that.
That's Eamon Cohen down there.
I think I would just like to add in two people whom I knew personally who supported Tony really well. One is Pat Murphy, who opened the show, and Gordon Lambert. And one of the interesting things about Gordon Lambert was David Hendricks' partner, husband. There wasn't such thing as a husband at the time, but David didn't like Tony's work at all, and Gordon would buy David a Tony O'Malley for his birthday every year, a small painting for his birthday every year. He also hated Nash, the English sculptor, and he would buy for their anniversary. He would buy David a Nash to just turn the wheel a little bit, but just to that the importance, I think, and it's one of the importance that is actually not here in the Irish art world at the moment, is where you had the business community came together and they selected an artist, and both Pat Murphy was the buyer for hops for Guinnesses, and he really championed, especially at a time when Irish artists were incredibly poor. He championed Irish art considerably. And then Gordon, who was the CEO of Jacobs, the biscuit factory, he then took over and started using his money to buy Irish art. So I think that just to acknowledge those two people in the support of Tony and Jane and what they did to make that house and gardens what it is. So just to acknowledge them.
Thanks for that, Eamon. And just in front of lady there that had.
I just wanted to say that I'm so inspired by the way that Tony was so sure of his gift, even in the very early days when he had nothing to go on at all. He was so certain of his gift and the importance of his gift. And he was so faithful to his gift in spite of everything. That's so inspiring.
That's a nice point, all right. Anyone else like to share anything, or there's various people in the room that knew them both well? Any stories you'd like to recount? No? Okay. Very good. Well, I think we've gone from Dublin to, we've gone from Kilkenny to St. Ives. We've touched on the Bahamas, and we're back again in Kilkenny. And does anyone like to? Has anyone got any parting words before we end here? Anyone on the panel have anything to add? No. I think we're around here for a while if you'd like to ask anyone a question. But thank you for your attention. I really do hope that you get to see the exhibition and look out for the various the learning program we have compiled during the run of the show. And just thoughts of Jane and Tony today. And thanks for all being here. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Catherine would just like to add something.
Actually, no, this is very small, but you mentioned Lorna. I think, Lorna, you should stand up so we can all say thanks to you.
There you go.
Because
That's
Lorna
great.
was
Yeah.
more important than anyone.
Thank you all.